And that next somebody is Melody. And Melody is going to talk about the hidden delinquency mortgage dangers. Is that correct, Melody? Are you ready to go?
Correct. So what I wanted to talk about today with everybody is that we are hearing, similarly to the way that Travis was highlighting all-time highs per Redfin. Well, that is, not true, number one. But number two, Redfin is very limited in its data as well. What I've been able to understand by looking at tracking cities, I use a whole bunch of different sources, Realtor, Redfin, Zillow, et cetera, to track. And what I can now tell about Redfin, for instance, is that they have way more existing homes than they have new. So we're always limited by the perspective of the data source. And so when this comes to delinquency, this is even more true. And so I just want to, up on the screen, what you have right now is the Fred chart for all delinquency commercial banks. And if you look at it, you can see that we're basically trending, and this is just the banks, around where we were for Q3 2006. Now, what's really important about this is that a big part of market share moved to non-banks after the GFC. Because of Basel III requirements, the banks no longer wanted to hold mortgage servicing rights. These things had to be risk weighted in a way that would have impacted their leverage ratios. And so they started pulling back. In a way, it was their way to say to the Fed, all of these restrictions, you broke contract law. Like for the top five, and I was at a company that was in the top five that was subject to the Federal Reserve consent order. And actually there were more banks, but at first it was just the top five. They essentially made us break our contracts with our borrowers. And once that happened, essentially the banks kind of said, we're done. We're pulling back. And the non-banks came in, they purchased up all of those mortgage servicing rights. And so to look at this chart to try and understand delinquency, and I'm going to show you another slide. So I want you to keep these percentages in mind because I'm going to show you current delinquency at the non-banks and at the banks. And so here, again, we're kind of where we are at Q3 2006, which, funnily enough, is when I started at GMAC ResCap. And that is when my journey in this crazy thing that is mortgage and housing began. And the other thing I want everyone to kind of understand about the slide is that remember that delinquency topped in Q1 of 2010, and not 2008, not 2007. It was Q1 2010, and we kind of chopped around there for some time. And at this time, what was happening, all of the banks and my company had signed the consent order. We were in the middle of the Attorney General settlement where 49 states basically made the banks agree to do certain things in this space. And while that was happening, foreclosures were on hold, okay? So we chopped around, and in reality, delinquency didn't start going down until Q3 of 2012. And so I want everybody to understand that because we talk about 2008, but in reality, what happened to the housing market took a lot longer to unfold. Okay, so this is the commercial banks. Right now, I think they have about, they're holding on their books, our due origination of about 15%, honestly, of mortgage servicing out there, mortgage origination from the bank perspective. Okay, so here, this slide is titled incorrectly, but it's supposed to say mortgage delinquency, Black Knight. But essentially what we then have was Black Knight step in to try to, they are seen in the industry, they're owned by ICE, same folks that own the New York Stock Exchange. They are seen as the people that really could give us this information now. Well, the problem with that is that they only see 80% of mortgage servicing, okay? And so they're missing 20%, and they won't tell you exactly who that 20% is. And this is what concerns me. Just tell me who you have, tell me who you don't have, because then I could understand if I need to trust your numbers. But, I've been tracking these guys for my entire career. I could tell you some stories, but let me just tell you, all they care about is your data and selling it, number one. But looking at this chart, you can see, they kind of try to argue that we're at the lowest levels of delinquency. This chart goes back to like 2003. They do this weird thing where they show you the 2000 to 2005 average. Why they choose those years is kind of funny to me. Why not choose 2006, 2007, because that was the runway into the crisis. They choose not to show that here. And so they do a lot of interesting things talking about all-time lows. But again, they kind of hide information. You can see in this bullet point, the inflow of new 30-day lates along with rolls to later stages of delinquency improve for March. What does improve mean? If you can't give me, percentages, you don't really want to tell me. But what they said, what's really important for you guys to understand is that while cures were down among both early and late stage delinquencies, what does that mean? You had improved. And that could have been due to seasonal factors, to be honest with you, because we're still people got their bonuses in March. They got those bonuses. People might still have their tax refunds. They're going to improve. But what's more concerning is how sticky this is, meaning that you didn't have cure. So when I prepare delinquency reports for my clients, I always show them, hey, here's what rolled to later stage delinquency, and here's your cures. And what I'm seeing is we're not curing, which means that delinquency is getting sticky. And I think those of you that know me know that I don't think we're going to see material delinquency in this market. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second, in this regulated mortgage market until probably June of next year. It's definitely going to start increasing from here, but material later. And so the other thing I want everyone to understand about Black Knight, for some reason, they always exclude their foreclosures from these statistics. So you don't do that. I don't know why they do that. And so it's actually higher, like 3.95%. But again, we're looking at their series, so it doesn't really matter. But they do that. And so just remember that. The other thing I want to talk about really quickly is all products are not equal when it comes to delinquency. And so you guys have heard me say, you've heard all of us talk about FHA because it is out of control, guys. It doesn't make any sense that we should be at a 10.4% delinquency when you have had the most aggressive programs out there, and you've got still $5 million of home ownership assistance fund money sitting out there that can be deployed. I see it all the time. My borrowers are getting cured by homeowner assistance funds. You work straight with them, they'll send back in the reinstatement fund. So the fact that we're sitting here at this delinquency is insane. The other thing that FHA does is these things called single family loan sales. You've heard us talk about these before too, but what they do is they sell them out into the private marketplace. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, they do it as well. And what's so important to understand is that when you sell it to those private investors, for instance, Pretium was the last investor to win the Fannie Mae deal. They are told they cannot foreclose for 2 years, sometimes 5 years, guys. But what they will do instead is they'll go in and they'll offer that borrower cash for keys and say, listen, I'm going to give you some money to $10,000. I mean, we guys, at the end of the GFC, we were giving out checks for $10,000, $30,000, $40,000, whatever, because we are getting so much pressure from the GSCs to move these delinquent loans. And you guys have heard me talk about that. But so we're seeing FHA it's beyond comprehension, this delinquency level, to be honest, with all of the programs. I mean, people didn't have to pay for 18 months. Then they could take that 18 months and put it at the back of their loan and not have to pay it off. I mean, it doesn't make sense. So anyway, okay. The other, you can see conventional with PMI, that's your Fannie Freddie with mortgage insurance. But there's also some interesting sneaky stuff. This is behind the scenes Black Knight data that you're looking at right now. And I just want to, I can't tell you exactly what it is. I can tell you what I think it is. But if you look at that FHA project, that's 16% delinquent. I have a feeling that's those reverse mortgages from that failed lender. And I think, and then you got another thing here, miscellaneous and CRE and House America. They don't really tell you what these things are. But my point is that they're hiding it. And I'll tell you more about that in just a second too, where I think they're hiding it. So then let's look at the delinquency by interest rate. I mean, I think this would make sense to most people. Travis, this might be your question. My question to you at the end of this, or your question back to me, is what I found fascinating, and I haven't had time to really look at, is the fact that 5 to 5.49% is kind of the highest among all of these until you get to the 8. And I think that might have to do with vintage year of origination. I have not been able to figure out how to pull that yet, but I'm going to look into it. But that's something I want us to think about for the future. Okay, so that's just kind of some interesting, but here is kind of the clincher, guys. So inside mortgage finance, they track, all this world of origination and servicing. It's a very costly publication. Hardly anybody actually gets access to it, to be honest. It's just cost prohibitive unless you're like Richard Whalen at, big bank guy kind of thing. But here they list servicers and their delinquency rates. And so remember what I just said about the banks, and we saw that delinquency rate at like a 1.71. Well, look at Chase's delinquency, 1.62, Wells Fargo's 3.13. I mean, they have some problems. Bank of America, you can't see because I covered over it, but it's 1.3%. And so the banks themselves do have fairly low delinquency, and that's what it looks like at Fred. But then let's look at the non-bank servicers. FCI lender servicers. This is services. This is really important, guys. So this entity, they service non-qualified mortgages, and they also service the private note space. Okay. More and more every single day, I have started to realize that likely what has happened is that we've all been a part of the narcon of trying to make us think that their relevance has not been decreasing since basically 2015, that there is an entire private market that's not regulated, that we don't even know about, that's not in the home mortgage disclosure numbers. Mortgage Bankers Association doesn't have it. Black Knight doesn't have it. Fed doesn't have it. No one has these numbers. And FCI Lender Services is one of those servicers. There are many. The other thing that's interesting about this chart, guys, is the little note at the bottom that says some servicers included in the survey are not shown. Guess what? 4 of the top 5 FHA-VA servicers are not on this schedule. 4 of the top 5, which include Rocket and UW, United Wholesale, for those of you that don't know. So this is all a game of optics. This is all a game of hide. It's like that game where where you hide the coin. That's what's going on here. No one has a full picture, and these headlines keep screaming at you. And I can tell I'm going to a conference next week in Nashville on this private note space. I'll be interviewing the guy that's running the conference. We're going to get a lot of information. But guys, based on my initial conversations with him, this market is in at least probably in the trillion, for at least 1 trillion. And if you think about the biggest year of mortgage origination, we hit 4.4 trillion per year. And so this market is significant and no one's talking about it. And anecdotally from the last conference, we heard a lot about stress and delinquency. So.
Okay. All right. Well, I will start the question, Melly. I mean, there's a lot to cover. First of all, we don't even have enough time.
Sorry.
No, that was some good stuff. But going back to your point on like the delinquency, like the higher delinquency being on that, like, I think it was 4.5 to 5.5%. I think it was that. To me, that's an easy answer. That's the start of quantitative tightening. That's what rates were.
Okay.
So that's what rates were like right after quantitative tightening started happening, and then home prices stopped accelerating overall. So that tells me that first.
Yeah. Do you remember what month that was? The month like
that it went to 5%?
Yeah.
I'll double check. I'll double check here.
Okay.
Actually, I have it right here. Actually, I do have it. Oh my God! Here, let me throw it up. It's right here. Okay, let's see. So we want to look at when did we get to 5? So right here. See, look at May, June. Like I said, of 2022. You see that? So that is right because we started quantitative tightening when March, right down here. So again, that's to me, it's the first line of people that are like the closest to the great financial crisis homeowners. Those are the homeowners with no equity that are basically trapped in their house. I think that's what we're seeing in the data. We're finally starting to see that box of homeowners unravel, and that's horrible. I'm not saying it's a good thing.
And I can tell you from, just the delinquency I'm seeing in my client books, it is all mid 21, 22, 23. I mean, you're not seeing a ton of pre 21 delinquency, at least in my current client books. They do sell servicing though. So it could be that I'm not seeing as much historical, but this chart kind of ties with what I'm seeing with my clients.
I do have a question though, Melia, and you said something that I didn't realize. I'm kind of putting it together now. You basically said that you believe that June of 2025 is when we will really start seeing data that will show us the real issues in foreclosure about June of next year. But I also want to remind the viewers that July also of 2025 is when Endgame happens. Basel III Endgame that has been, what, 10 years in the work? Like, my God.
They just actually postponed it again.
Did they postpone? Oh my God.
Yeah, we can check, but I'm pretty sure they postponed it to 20. Let's look. I thought they did. I could be making something up. I don't think it's ever going to happen. It's ever going to happen, to be honest with you.
Well, my question was, I mean, what impact will that simultaneously have on the what impact will that have on the financing sector when you have Basel and a foreclosure wave happening? Those non-banks are dead.
Yeah. So I think it's not going to happen. I think Basel III, I think they're about to claw this all back. I think that's what this whole, when they went out saying they were going to raise the capital requirements and then Powell, walked that back, and the banks are in control. They need the banks to buy treasuries. And so I think the banks are they're going to get anything they want. And I think Basel III will be walked back. And I do believe that all the mortgage will come back to the banks, and that they're going to make an example of the non-banks. But I thought you were actually going to talk about July 22 for another reason, which is, I'm saying 22. July of 25 is when you're going to start to see those 3-2-1s really kick in from July of 20, because that is when in earnest the builders started offering those buy downs. So very similarly, and everybody's like, it's not an ARM. I know it's not an ARM. I'm just saying it's going to cause similar issues that the ARMs did back during the last crisis, because when they reset to that final rate, what Jack was saying earlier about, the date, the rate, or like the refi, and they're not able to do that. If we are still up in rates, then that is going to be a big shock. And it all happens. And this is why I think 25 is just going to be a terrible year for housing.
Okay. Let's do one question from Jack, and then we'll take some questions from viewers.
I'm really struggling with that whole, hey, some of the largest participants in the market are not included. They were in the survey, but we're not putting them in the chart. It's like, okay, here's a chart of who's responsible for taking care of kids, but we left out mom and dad.
Right.
That's kind of a big deal, right? What's the value in this data? Is there any reasoning given for why companies like UWM and Market are left out of that data, other than we want the data to say what we want it to say, so we're messing with how we report it?
It's optics. You can look at like Inside Mortgage Finance. I mean, they honestly, I'm a big fan of the data they do collect, because you can't find it anywhere else, and it really is a bunch of insiders. I mean, this thing is very cost prohibitive. But you can basically see, like, United. When you look at Inside Mortgage Finance's risk schedule, they'll show you like outstanding, like what credit scores are, like, but for mortgage-backed securities, there's a note at the bottom of that schedule that says we exclude anyone under any loans under 650 credit score are in foreclosure. Like, what? Why would you exclude that from the risk schedule? I mean, I don't.
Pretty much all the foreclosures right there, isn't it? Right.
Right. I mean, so as someone who's been on these risk committees, as someone who has, I mean, my job in 2006 and 2007 was looking at our book deteriorate. That's what I did. I watched loan to value come down. I watched credit scores come down. I watched all of this unfold. Like, everybody's like, we just showed up and the strippers were going to foreclosure. No, that's not what happened. It's, yes, you had non-traditional products, largely driven by investors. And then as the prime consumer came under stress, that's when you started to have delinquency. But yes, guys, I'm more and more convinced every day that this has just been a con. It's been a con. The con with the low inventory. And so I think exactly, Jack, they get to they get to decide, and United gets to decide wholesale that it's not going to be on the schedule when they are a very large FHA VA lender. I mean, they've got all kinds of trouble. We could do a whole show on that, and maybe we will next week. But yeah, Jack, it's galling. It's just so upsetting that this, this is all narrative.
All right, I got a question here. I got 3 questions. We're a little bit behind time, but we're doing really well. And I want to confront some of the more optimistic comments as well. I mean, I want to just talk about everything. So, they're mentioning a few housing market positive. 40% of homes have no debt. It was 33% in 2020. I wonder if that's institutional investing. I don't know. Average mortgage rates still below. I don't know where they're getting that data. Average mortgage rates still below. What? I don't know.
Let me just take this. I know Tim well. I know Tim very well. Yeah.
Take it.
So first of all, it's not that they have no debt. It's theoretically, we think that 40% of homes have no mortgage debt. But we'll talk about Colony Ridge here in a minute. And we'll talk about some other alternatives that people are using to get cash that aren't mortgages. And so these houses may not be as free and clear as you think. There's all kinds of alternative lending structures where it's not free, but you're not going to find it in the typical place you're looking for it. And I think that is the story. That's going to be the story of this cycle, is that everybody got annoyed by what happened during the last one, wanted theirs, and they figured out how to work around the system. And when I talked to a lot of these private note folks, they're people from Saudi, sovereign wealth groups. So these are people like the Chinese, Saudi Arabia, that were working through entities to buy these homes, because everybody up until, kind of February of 22, when we invaded Russia, then started taking, Russia's money, everybody thought the US was a safe place to be. And so you had a ton of foreign money, even if it didn't look like it was a foreign buyer. So we don't understand that as well. But what's happening, guys, what I think is happening right now is you're actually having, and we've seen this in California and Florida, Chinese are shedding some of those assets. And so I think you're going to start seeing that scaling back. And we don't know for sure. And even so, 60% have mortgages. We have a 64% home ownership rate as well. So, I mean, what does that really mean? How is that going to change the market, I guess, is of what we're seeing right now.
One more question, Melody, and then we'll move
Travis,
on.
Travis, did you want to, you're on. Oh, yeah.
So one more, and then we'll move on to the next story. This is from Neighborhood Cat Lady. Who doesn't like a cat lady? As long as you're cleaning up after your cats, miss. Okay. Now, this is what she says. I don't think it took too many delinquencies to crash the market during the GFC. And will you talk about that? Because a lot of people like a housing market crash. It was a financial market crash. It wasn't a housing market. The purchasing power was destroyed from delinquencies and NODs. But Melody, can you just take this one away, please? This last comment.
Yeah, I mean, guys, as much as I never wanted to be the person and say, this is like 2008, because I don't. But there are several factors that are very similar. And that's why I really spent time on that chart, because crashed the market during the GFC. Well, it didn't crash the housing market. You could see the delinquency up there in 2010. This took a very long time to play out. And I have a schedule, I didn't put it up, of kind of the inverse relationship between mortgage equity and delinquency and how those flipped and how long it took. And so it's more about that our purchasing power has been eroded. We pulled forward some demand during COVID in housing. It's more about who is now going to be buying homes. So I just told you that the foreign buyers are pulling back. You've got your prime borrowers who are being crushed by increased taxes and inflation. You've got your institutionals becoming net sellers because they are also being crushed by property taxes and insurance costs, and it just doesn't cash flow anymore. So who is going to be buying? There are going to be those that have to transact because of some life event. But the top 20% have bought all the homes, and we've got 15 million vacant properties in this country. That's not abandoned, that's vacant. And so as these boomers retire, these things will also come to the market because they don't want to carry these second and third homes anymore. And so it's not about it's really about these larger macro themes of people are not going to have money to purchase, and they can't sustain their current expenses. And yes, we'll have foreclosures, but to me, it's less about looking at one thing that really crashed the market then, and looking at all these broader themes that are going to impact prices now.
Well done, Melody. I mean, honestly, round of applause. That was a great story. I really appreciate it.